The afternoon the County Water Commission called an emergency meeting, Vera Paulson was hauling her third load of the day from the cisterns, 15 gallons of clear rainwater, sloshing in food-grade containers, while her neighbors sat in folding chairs at the high school gym, listening to officials explain why their wells had gone dry. She didn't attend. She had tomatoes to water. 10 months earlier, Vera had stood in the gravel parking lot of Holtman's Hardware in Cedar Falls, Kansas, while Dale Holtman and 2 other men watched her load 6 downspout diverters, 3 rain barrels, and 50 feet of food-grade hose into her truck bed. "Planning for the flood, Vera?" Dale called out. Laughter from the other men. She signed the receipt without looking up. "Planning ahead." "Ahead of what?" "We're in a drought cycle. Rain barrels in a drought." More laughter. Vera met his eyes then. That calm, measuring look she'd inherited from her mother, who'd farmed through the Dust Bowl as a girl and never forgot what lack of water could do. "That's exactly when you need them." Dale's smile faltered, then recovered. "Well, you do you." She drove the 15 miles home to Paulson Century Farm, named for the 100 years her family had worked the same quarter section, and started installing the barn roof first, 1,600 square feet of metal that had been shedding water into the dirt for decades. She ran gutters along the south side, directed everything into a series of salvaged food-grade tanks she'd bought from a dairy going out of business. 2,000 gallons of capacity when she finished. Her brother-in-law Michael saw it when he came by to borrow the tractor. "Jesus, Vera, what is all this? Rainwater harvesting. For what?" "Irrigation. Livestock. Whatever needs it." He walked around the setup, shaking his head. "You know we've got a well, right? Rural water on every farm in the county." "I know. So this is what? A hobby?" She was tightening the seal on the first tank, her hands already calloused from a lifetime of work. At 53, Vera had shoulders that could wrestle fence posts and a face the sun had carved into something weatherproof. Insurance. Against what? The apocalypse. Against need. Michael's wife Diane called that night. Vera's younger sister, born after their mother had softened a little, raised differently. "Mike says you're building some kind of water fortress?" "I'm catching rain." "Honey, people are talking. Karen Westfield said you're preparing for the end times." Vera looked out her kitchen window at the tanks, already positioned and waiting for the next ring. "Karen Westfield can mind her business. I'm just saying, it looks strange. All those barrels and tanks. People wonder. Let them wonder." "Vera, I've got evening chores, Diane." She hung up and went out to her chickens, heritage breeds, dual-purpose birds that could handle heat and cold both. Her garden ran along the south fence, 3/4 of an acre in raised beds she'd built herself, amended with compost she'd been building for 5 years. Nothing about Vera Paulson's farm was accidental. She'd been watching the weather patterns, reading the groundwater reports the county published every quarter, talking to the old-timers at the cafe who remembered when the Ogallala Aquifer was full and infinite. The rain came in November, a steady 3-day system that filled her tanks to capacity. Vera watched the overflow run into the gravel basin she prepared. Infiltration, groundwater recharge. The science was simple. The implementation just required work. At the co-op meeting in December, she mentioned water conservation during open comments. "I'd encourage everyone to look at rainwater harvesting. We've had declining well levels for 5 years. It's going to matter." Tom Brighton, who farmed 2 sections of wheat, snorted. "Vera, we're sitting on top of one of the biggest aquifers in North America. We're fine. The aquifer's dropping 3 feet a year in this county." That's what they said in the 80s. Still, pumping strong. Until we're not. The room went quiet. That uncomfortable silence that happens when someone speaks an unwelcome truth plainly. The moderator cleared his throat. "Okay, well, thanks for that input, Vera. Next item." She sat down. She'd said it. That's all she could do. The spring was dry. April brought 2 inches of rain instead of the normal 6. May brought 1 inch. By June, the wheat fields looked stunted, the pastures turned brown early, and the conversation at the cafe shifted from optimistic to concerned. Vera's tanks sat at 60% capacity. She used the water strategically, garden irrigation on drip lines, chickens, and the 3 beef cattle she kept. Her garden flourished while others struggled. Her livestock water stayed clean and plentiful. Diane stopped by in mid-June, pulled up in a cloud of dust. "Your tomatoes look incredible. Good soil. Consistent water. How?" We're rationing at our place. Mike says the well's running lower than he's ever seen. I'm using the rain tanks. Diane looked at the cistern system, really looked this time. Those actually work. They hold water. That works. Would you help us set something up? Diane, you called me crazy 6 months ago. Her sister's face colored. I didn't say crazy. I said people were talking. Same thing. Vera, please. I'm asking. Vera studied her. Saw the genuine worry, the beginning of fear. Family was family. I'll come look. But there's no quick fix. You need rain to catch rain. Anything helps. That night, the Weather Service issued a long-range forecast. Hot. Dry. The phrase historic drought conditions appeared in the text. Vera walked her fence line at sunset, checking the soil moisture, planning the next phase of conservation. The wheat fields around her place looked desperate. Her garden looked like something from a magazine. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt prepared. And July was coming. The first well went dry on July 3rd, the Mitchell place, for miles east. By July 10th, 6 more farms had pumped their wells to dust. The County Emergency Management Office started coordinating water deliveries, tanker trucks running routes like a wartime supply chain. Vera's well held steady. She'd been monitoring the level since March, checking it weekly with a weighted line. It had dropped 18 inches, but still had depth. The difference was her usage. She'd pulled maybe 30% of her normal volume, relying on the cisterns for everything else. The tanks were down to 40% now. No rain since May, but 40% of 2,000 gallons was still 800 gallons of buffer, and she managed it like it was liquid gold. Tom Brighton showed up on a Tuesday morning, driving slow up her lane like he wasn't sure of his welcome. Vera was cleaning the chicken coop, mucking old straw into the compost system. Vera, got a minute? She leaned the pitchfork against the wall. Tom, my well's at 7 feet. Used to be 30. He took his hat off, worked the brim in his hands. I've got livestock that need water. 300 head of cattle. That's a lot of animals for a failing well. Yeah, I'm figuring that out. He looked at her setup, the tanks, the gravity-fed lines, the systematic efficiency of it. He tried to tell us. I did. I didn't listen. No. He stood there, a man who'd farmed successfully for 30 years, now facing a truth he'd dismissed. Could you help me? Explain how this works. Tom, the time to build this was last fall. You need rain to harvest. I know, but anything I can do now, you can start planning for next year. Assuming we get a next year. She wasn't being cruel, just factual. Right now, you need to reduce your herd. Sell off what you can while they still have weight. Keep your core breeding stocked, the ones you can sustain. His face went gray. That's half my income. Better than losing all of it. He left without another word. That afternoon, Diane called. You couldn't have been gentler with Tom. I told him the truth. He's devastated. He'll be more devastated when his cattle die of thirst. I gave him the only option that works. Jesus, Vera, you don't have to be so hard. Hard is watching people suffer because they wouldn't prepare. I'm being practical. She hung up and went back outside. Her 3 cattle watched her from the shade of the equipment shed, water trough full, their coats glossy. She'd never expanded, never pushed for maximum production. Just sustainable numbers, sustainable practices. The garden was thriving despite the heat. She'd mulched heavily, used drip irrigation on timers, selected drought-tolerant varieties for half the beds. The tomatoes hung heavy on their stakes. The beans climbed their poles in lush green spirals. She'd have enough to can, enough to sell at the farmer's market, enough to share. That last part mattered. On Saturday, she loaded her truck with produce and drove into Cedar Falls. The farmer's market was sparse. Most vendors had given up. Their crops failed. Vera set up her table and within 20 minutes had a line. How are you growing this? A woman asked, holding a perfect beefsteak tomato like it was precious. My whole garden died. Water conservation. Soil preparation. Planning. Could you teach people? Like a class. Vera looked at the crowd gathering, the desperate faces, the people who'd laughed or dismissed her. I could. But folks need to be ready to work. This isn't a quick fix. We're ready, the woman said. Others nodded. Okay. Next Saturday. My place. Bring notebooks and questions. She sold out in 45 minutes. Drove home with an empty truck and a full cash box. Dale Holtman called that evening. Vera. Dale. I'm wondering if you've got any of those rain barrels left. The ones you bought last year. I installed all of them. Right? Could you order more? I've got 6 people asking. Dale, there's no rain to catch right now. I know, but when it comes, everyone's going to want the same thing. You're looking at months of backorder, minimum. Should have ordered in the fall. Silence. Then, I was wrong. To laugh. I'm sorry. I appreciate that. Call Henderson's in Wichita. They might have stock. And Dale, when this breaks, when the rain finally comes back, remember what it felt like to be without. Remember, and prepare. Yes, ma'am. 16 people showed up on Saturday. Vera walked them through her entire system. The roof collection, the first flush diverters that kept debris out, the storage setup, the distribution methods. She showed them her soil, explained the biology, the water-holding capacity she'd built over years of composting and minimal tillage. Tom Brighton came, stood in the back, taking notes like a student. Questions? Vera asked after the tour. When did you know? A younger farmer, maybe 30, with the hollow look of someone watching their dream fail. When did you know this was coming? I didn't know. I prepared for the possibility. That's different. But how did you decide? Everyone else said the aquifer was fine. My mother lived through drought that killed people. Killed the land. She taught me that water is never guaranteed. You catch it when it's there. You store it. You respect it. Vera looked at the group, saw the mix of desperation and genuine interest. You can start now. Even without rain, you can build the infrastructure. Test your soil. Plan your system. Then when the rain comes, you're ready. They stayed for 3 hours. Asking, learning, finally listening. That night, Vera checked the long-range forecast again. Still dry. The heat dome holding steady over the plains. Her well was at 24 feet now. The tanks were at 30%. She'd have to make harder choices soon. Reduce the garden. Possibly sell one of the cattle. But she'd make it. And when the rain finally came, she'd be ready to catch every drop. The rain started on September 16th, 3 months later than anyone had predicted. Vera woke to the sound of water on her metal roof. That particular drumming that meant real precipitation, not a tease. She went outside in her nightgown, stood in her yard, and let it soak her to the skin. The storm lasted 6 hours. For inches, measured. Her tanks went from 20% to full capacity. Overflow running into the infiltration basins. Groundwater finally getting replenishment. All across the county, farmers stood in their yards, watching systems they'd hurriedly installed over the summer catch their first harvest. Tom Brighton had managed to build a basic setup in August. 2 tanks, simple gutters. He called Vera that afternoon. It's working. I'm catching water. Good. I sold half my herd. Kept the breeding stock like he said. I'm going to make it. His voice cracked slightly. Because of you. Because you finally listened. To me, to the land, to reality. Yes, ma'am. The October rains continued, a pattern shift that brought the moisture back. Wells began to recover. The emergency water delivery stopped. The county slowly exhaled. But something had changed. The farmers who'd suffered through July and August didn't forget. The workshops at Vera's place continued. Twice a month now. People coming from 3 counties over to learn water harvesting, soil management, sustainable practices. Diane and Michael installed a full system, 800 gallons of capacity. Should have listened to you a year ago, Michael admitted. Would have saved ourselves a lot of pain. People learn when they're ready, Vera said. Not before. The county extension office called in November. Ms. Paulson, we'd like to feature your farm in our sustainable agriculture program. Would you be willing to do some official workshops? What's it pay? We have a small stipend for educational programs. How small? 200 per workshop. Make it 300 and cover my material costs, and I'll do 4 workshops between now and spring. We can work with that. The first official workshop drew 47 people. Vera walked them through everything. The physics of rainwater harvesting, the economics, the long-term planning. She showed her records from July, when her tanks had sustained her through the worst of it. A reporter from the Regional Farm Journal attended. The article ran in December. Kansas farmers' preparation pays off. Water harvesting as drought insurance. The phone started ringing. Other states, other counties. People who'd watched their wells fail wanted to know how to prevent it next time. Jessica Hammond, the young farmer who'd asked when Vera knew, showed up in January with plans drawn up for her own place. I'm doing this right. Building the system before I need it. Smart. Because you showed us how. Vera helped her design the setup, calculate capacity, source materials. Watched Jessica build it herself over 4 weekends, learning by doing. By spring, 17 farms in the county had water harvesting systems. Not just barrels, real capacity, serious storage. The co-op meetings shifted, talk turning to conservation, resilience, planning. Dale Holtman kept a permanent display of rain harvesting equipment in his store now, sold more in 6 months than he'd sold in the previous decade. Tom Brighton converted 100 acres to drought-tolerant native pasture, reduced his herd permanently to what he could sustain. Better margins this way, he told Vera. Less stress. More sustainable. Wish I'd figured it out before the drought forced me. You figured it out. That's what matters. The vindication wasn't in being right. Vera had never needed that. It was in the changed landscape. Literally changed, transformed by people who'd finally understood that water wasn't infinite, that preparation mattered, that the old knowledge of catching and storing and respecting resources was the newest wisdom they could learn. She stood in her garden on a May morning, 15 months after she'd loaded those first diverters into her truck, and looked at the thriving beds, the full tanks, the system humming along efficiently. The rain had returned, but nobody was taking it for granted anymore. Diane came by with a basket of her own vegetables, her garden, watered from her system, producing abundantly. Look at this. I grew this. You did. Because you taught me. I showed you. You did the work. They sat on Vera's porch, two sisters who'd taken different paths to the same understanding. The land stretched around them, green and growing, sustained by water that had fallen months ago, stored by people who'd learned to think ahead. Thank you, Diane said, for being stubborn. Vera smiled just a little. Someone had to be. That evening, she walked her fence line like always, checking the irrigation, monitoring the soil. The tank sat at 80%. She'd used some for the garden, refilled with the recent rains. The well had recovered to 28 feet, nearly back to normal. Everything in balance. Everything sustainable. A truck turned into her lane. Another farmer, another person wanting to learn. Vera walked back to the house to meet them. The work continued. The knowledge spread. And when the next drought came, and it would, eventually, the county would be ready. Not because they'd been forced to believe her. Because they'd been forced to understand, and understanding had turned to action, and action had turned to transformation. Vera Paulson had never needed to prove anyone wrong. She just needed to proceed, steadily and certainly, doing what she knew was right. The land had done the rest, teaching its lessons in the only language that mattered: survival, abundance, and the deep satisfaction of being prepared when others weren't. The geese she'd added last fall called from the barn. Tomorrow there'd be another workshop. More questions. More people learning to catch the rain. Vera went inside to make dinner, her calloused hands moving through familiar tasks, her weathered face peaceful. Outside, the tanks held their water. The garden grew, and the sky promised rain again soon. Rain she was ready to catch.